My name is Gaijin Greg, and welcome to my 2-year Japanese learning update video. I apologize, guys, that I'm about a month behind schedule on this video. Life's been absolutely bonkers since the start of 2025, but no, I have not quit. I'm here with my Kazoku t-shirt, and as of today's filming, I'm 755 days into studying Japanese with an input or immersion based approach. And I've got some other older update videos, and you can check those out down in the description below. But I became a parent since the last update video, and before we get into that, let's go take a look at the stats. So here, as you can see, we've got the stats. So for total time studied, I've got 1,529 hours for an average of about 2 hours and 2 minutes a day, which is thankfully still above my goal of 2 hours a day. For listening, we've got 968 hours or 63% of my time. For vocabulary, we've got 396 hours for about 26% of my time. We've got dedicated grammar study, which is about 71 hours or 5% of my time. We've got reading, which is about 78 hours, 5%. And then we've got pronunciation with 14 hours or 1%. So let's get into what I've been immersing with. And for podcasts, not really much has changed. I've kind of been listening to the same ones. I'm kind of bored of the learners, like the language learner podcast at this point. And I'm really looking for something like native content for natives, but I haven't been able to find anything great yet. For anime, I've watched quite a bit. First off, I've watched So no Frieren, or Frieren, I think that's how you pronounce it. I have really been recommended this show a lot by a lot of people, including non-language learners, and I have to say it did not disappoint. Like, the vibes were just immaculate, and if you haven't watched this already, I highly recommend that you do. The next thing I've been watching is Bleach, or Bleach. This is really one of my favorite anime of all time, so it's just kind of comfort food and fun for me to watch this in Japanese. The one thing I will say I've noticed is, like, the way all the characters talk in Bleach is just so extremely tropey and over the top, which maybe makes it not the greatest for language learning, but it's still fun. For dramas, I've been watching quite a few. So the first one I've been watching is Trillion Game, or Trillion Game. And this was really just kind of a fun, unserious drama that was decent enough for me to want to finish it. There was a lot of business talk, which is kind of always hard for me, but the pacing was good enough that I still enjoyed it. The next one that I watched was Kimi ni Todoke, or From Me to You, and I really enjoyed the live-action Netflix take on this story. It just felt so wholesome, and like, if you're a sucker for high school dramas like I am, you're really going to enjoy this. Next, I watched Ryusei no Kizuna, or The Ties of the Shooting Stars, I think is what it's called in English. And this show is great. It's about 3 siblings whose parents were murdered, and how they go about trying to capture the murderer before the statute of limitations ends. And I just randomly found this browsing through Netflix, and I had a great time, and there was a lot of unexpected twists and turns. And finally, I've been watching Terrace House Boys and Girls Next Door, and I already loved Terrace House, but coming back to the OG season was really something else. Like, this is hands down the best season of Terrace House, and honestly, there were some moments with, like, Daiki's storyline where, like, I legitimately was brought to tears. It was that good, and it was actually relatively hard for me to find the Japanese subtitles so I could sentence mine from this, but in the end I did find them, and I probably can't say how on this YouTube video, but check the description down below if you're also looking for the Japanese subtitles for this season. I can tell you where to go. For reading, I'm still not great, spoiler alert, but I've still been kind of chugging along through the Death Note manga, and then I tried reading the Kimi ni Todoke manga as well. But honestly, I just was not a fan of the art style, and even though, like, a lot of places recommend this as a good, relatively beginner manga, I just dropped it relatively quickly. It just wasn't for me, and I much preferred the Netflix show. And then for games, I kind of added a new section for games, even though I don't count this as immersion time. Since the last video, I beat Final Fantasy II. And then I also played Dragon Quest III HD 2D. Well, I haven't beat that game. I'm only about 7 hours in. there's a big difficulty spike, and I'm not talking about language, I'm talking about in the RPG itself, and I'm a veteran RPG player, but the thing that's great about this game is that it's got furigana for all of the kanji, and it really makes lookups a lot easier, so I highly recommend this game for any language learner. It's a great game. So for vocabulary, I've still been doing my sentence mining deck along with the reviews left from my core 2K, 6K deck. And then grammar, really, I haven't done any discrete grammar study since the last time we talked. Pretty much all I do is look up stuff in context as it comes up. If I ever did want to do more intentional grammar study, at this point I'd make sure I do it, videos made by Japanese, for Japanese, in Japanese. And then for pronunciation, I've started going through Dogen's Japanese phonetics course slowly to kind of prepare myself for when I start speaking, but we can kind of get into that a little bit later. I have some more thoughts on that. So now that we've got kind of all of that out of the way, let me kind of give you a look into my head and what I've been thinking for the last 6, I guess technically 7 months. So first things first, my daughter was born in August and she's been awesome. Being a dad and watching my wife be a mother has been so fun and so rewarding, and taking care of a kid is not easy, and we're still learning a lot as we go since it's our first child, but it does really feel worth it. And overall, I guess I'm super happy that I'm still averaging over 2 hours a day in Japanese study at this point. I'm not necessarily surprised that I've been able to do it, but I certainly want to take a second to recognize and appreciate my sustained effort and I guess all of the changes that have been happening, that I've been able to still do this. And I did have some days here and there, obviously when my daughter was first born, where I didn't get 2 hours or even close to it, and I just did my Anki, and that's perfectly okay. There has been a little bit of guilt, to be honest, with staying fairly consistent with Japanese while having a newborn or an infant or a baby, whatever you want to say. And I don't really know how to explain this, but sometimes I just feel bad for having a time-consuming hobby like learning a language or a goal that I want to continue on doing. And having a kid has definitely made, having this balance between language learning, fitness, healthy eating, which I still need to figure out, a lot harder. And I don't know, it's just kind of this weird feeling of guilt. And I guess moving forward, we are very lucky in that our daughter is a really good sleeper, and I haven't had to deal with a ton of lack of sleep affecting my ability to immerse or think or concentrate. And I know that it's much easier for the dads, I guess like me, than the breastfeeding mom. So I want to be appreciative in that aspect that I haven't had to deal with necessarily as much there. And my wife and I actually have opposite work schedules. So we have during the week a lot of periods where we're kind of solo parenting while the other is at work. And this can be difficult and exhausting, especially towards the end of the week. And it really gives me a greater appreciation of what the single parents out there are doing. I don't know how they do it. It's insane. So kudos to you guys out there. And I guess to give you a little snapshot into what my schedule looks like, typically I'm driving to work around 6:30, listening to a Japanese podcast in my 25-ish minute commute. And then I'll, once work's done, I'll pack up and go pick my daughter up from daycare around 5:30. And she goes to bed around 7 o'clock, and that's when I do my Anki and the rest of my immersion for the day. And sometimes, to be honest, it's very hard to be motivated after these long days. And I just want to be lazy and just not do it. And for the most part, I've been strong and able to force myself to do it. But to be honest, the past month or so, I've definitely been struggling to get it in consistently every day. And work has been crazy, and I've been doing a lot of overtime, and we've had crazy schedules on the weekends with family and friends, and that's kind of also part of the reason it's taken me so long to make this video. With everything that's going on in life, there's honestly days where I do feel like it'd be easier or less stressful if I didn't have a hobby I was dedicating 2 hours a day to consistently. And honestly, I sometimes look back on the days of, being done with work and having nothing to do with rose-tinted glasses, and I would just mindlessly play video games until the next day starts. But I do know that if I quit, I'd be bored again and I'd be disappointed in myself. if I did quit, I'm the type of person who needs to feel like they're working towards something, and I don't think I'd be happy if I'm not. So I also need to recognize that that was a different period in my life, and no matter what, you know, that period 2 years ago or more years ago is not what my life is like now, and I have different responsibilities now than I did 2 years ago. So I think some of it is just an overall life adjustment to having a kid now. But I know I've been rambling for a while now, but to summarize, basically I'm saying my time is scarcer now that I'm a parent, and I'm really continuously working to try to find more ways to have a sustainable language learning routine. Okay, so kind of moving on from the child and parent stuff here. In the past 6 months, for whatever reason, especially earlier on in kind of that period, I really started to dislike Anki, which is weird because it's usually something that I look forward to and has helped me kind of stay consistent. And I think this was due to the fact that at the beginning of this period, I was doing a bunch of sentence mining, and I still had cards left from the Core 2K, 6K. And basically, I was doing 20 new cards a day for, I don't know, maybe like a couple months. And this honestly got pretty overwhelming. I think that's too much for me. And I think there were days where I was close to 1 hour of Anki, which is pretty draining for sure. And so it's been going down for a little bit now, and I'm usually around 20 minutes a day for Anki, which is much better. I can definitely feel the intermediate plateau thing, and I know I just kind of need to keep grinding it out and staying proactive in how I approach things, but it's kind of weird because I have these days where honestly it feels like I can barely understand anything at all. And then there's the other days where like I'll go through a show and I'll be like, oh yeah, like I literally understood everything. I didn't need to stop for any lookups, and I just was watching it. So that kind of bipolar dichotomy is a little weird, and it seems like it's just random. I can't really find a pattern to those feelings. And I did mention before that I'm watching Terrace House Boys and Girls Next Door, and honestly, I am getting humbled. I do understand a lot, and I understand more than when I previously watched other Terrace House seasons, but watching this reality TV show where people speak naturally and very colloquially, it's really kind of just making me realize how much more work I have to do with real life speech. And my plan is to really try to hit the YouTube immersion hard, and hopefully that will help out a lot, but I still think it's important to immerse in what entertains me. So I'm never going to stop watching like animes or dramas, but we will try to have a focus in the next upcoming 6 months on YouTube and more colloquial speech. So just for fun, I decided to take the JLPT N3 questions online, like the practice test, and I got like 13 out of 17 right. And in general, that does feel about accurate. Like I'm at an N3-ish level. And keep in mind, I guess, I don't really study for anything like this. So that, you know, I'm not studying for JLPT type questions. I'm just learning Japanese to actually learn the language. And I do feel like I could super boost like my level in Japanese if I got into a lot of reading books. It's just so, honestly, it's just so hard for me to do that without falling asleep. And I don't want to give up hope on like reading yet, but I'm just not even a huge fan of books in English for the same reason. I know I've talked about this before, so I won't go into it anymore. I have messed around a bit though with some Japanese dictionaries, and honestly some of the definitions are starting to make complete sense to me, and like I'll know what the definition means by reading the Japanese like definition. And maybe it's time for me, I guess, to start, you know, making that monolingual transition and using a Japanese to Japanese dictionary. I'm a little scared, to be honest, but I think I probably should be doing this. I mentioned earlier that I started the Japanese Phonetics by Dogen course that he offers on his Patreon, and I'm still really just not sure how I feel about these yet. Like, I really do think it's great that they exist, and I think they are an incredible resource. However, just kind of the way the videos are set up seems to recommend a lot of, like, memorization and special rules, and that just kind of feels super inefficient to me. And I guess on the contrary, he still does like recommend a lot of immersion and acquiring a subconscious feel for both pitch accent and Japanese pronunciation. I suppose a combination of like actual rules and immersion is the best approach, and more awareness and knowing what to listen for is great, and that's really what I'm doing. But I don't know. Like I said, I have a hard time describing how I feel about this video series, but I do find it worthwhile enough of a resource where I'm going to finish the thing to the end. Speaking of speaking, I plan on starting to practice pronunciation with shadowing or chorusing around the 2.5-year mark, and potentially even doing some full-on conversations at that time, but I probably plan to wait until the 3-year mark for that. And really the difference between the two is that like speaking and making thoughts in your head with Japanese is going to be a lot more difficult than just practicing the pronunciation, but obviously both will still be important. My biggest fear really with this whole thing called speaking, I guess, is that like it's going to take away some of my time from immersion. And immersion has really been like the main vehicle that's driven my gains with the language, but I do know at some point I need to make that trade-off. I'm starting to think tentatively around 10,000 Anki vocabulary would be a good time. For reference, right now I have 7,900 vocabulary cards between my two main Anki decks, and I think this vocabulary goal of 10,000 really does line up with like the 3-year mark. I think I'm kind of on track for that. So long-term, bigger picture, I'd like to probably mine all the way up to 15 to 20,000 cards. I know I've talked about that in previous videos, but that's been solidified over these 6 months. I think at that point I would keep on doing my reviews and then stop with new cards, and the rest of the words I learn in the language would be just through, you know, seeing them enough in context. I guess getting back a little bit towards the speaking thing here, we got a little off topic there. I do understand that at some point, like, learning how to speak and communicate with natives is going to be the most beneficial thing for my learning, and after all, like, I want to make sure I can actually use all of my hours of hard work to converse with a native. So I am excited about speaking. I'm not afraid. It's just I don't know if I'm ready yet. Like, I want to keep on learning more and more and understand better and better before I go into these conversations with natives. So before we wrap the video up here, I wanted to make a couple goals that I have for the next 6 months. So first and foremost, I want to continue to prioritize my family and be a good father and husband. And although I think I've given up on maybe some of the more formal reading goals, I do certainly want to make sure I hit YouTube very hard and try to study some more colloquial Japanese and everyday Japanese, kind of how people actually talk, you know? And then finally, I want to continue to explore options to create a more sustainable language learning and really a more sustainable life routine. So as always, I appreciate you guys watching the video. I want to hear anything you guys have to say. How do you build a more sustainable routine for yourself? And do you have any non-educational Japanese YouTubers that you like to watch? Like, I'm talking about native YouTubers for natives. That's what I'm looking for. Let me know the answer to those questions down in the comments below. If you do like the video, please leave a like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get notified when the next progress video goes up in 6 months. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.